Put some hype in chat if you can hear me. Welcome, welcome. Yeah, so get on that channel on Discord, download that PDF, open it up on your laptop. There's going to be a bunch of hands-on sections. I'm also really happy to announce that this year the NorthSec volunteers have integrated Flagbot into this workshop. So all the hands-on solutions and all the Easter eggs that you will find during today, you can confirm them by DMing Flagbot, which is pretty cool. So thank you to Jean Froissart and the other NorthSec volunteers. Of course, NorthSec would not be possible without them. This is who I am. I hack trucks and cars, and I love to give this training, so I'm glad you're here. This is some of my favorite stuff to deliver. I give this class at the Cybertruck Challenge every year since its inception. That's kind of how this thing started. At the Cybertruck Challenge, we take like university students, undergrads mostly, but also some master students. They don't have to be cybersecurity experts. They can come from any field, really. And we do 2 days of intensive training, and then 2 days of assessments on real trucks. So if you know any undergrad students or any master's students and you think hacking trucks is cool, I do as well, go to the cybertruckchallenge.org website and sign up. So tell your student friends, or if you're a student, sign up. The travel stipend is included. So if you get accepted, they will pay for your travel. And you get like roughly probably $12,000 worth of training over the course of 2 days. It's really, really an incredible program. I am biased because I go there every year and I teach, and I just friggin' love it. But I think you will love it too. So anyhow, that's my plug for Cybertruck. I've also had the pleasure of presenting this at Hackfest and NorthSec, and I just love this content. It's going to be a lot of hands-on stuff. So where you see challenge here, I'm going to just throw it back to you. And you're going to have to go to that slide in the PDF, copy and paste some text, do some things to break the crypto. By the time we get down to the bottom, this UDS is Unified Diagnostic Services. That's what's found in trucks and cars, and also generators and anywhere else you find a diesel engine. And so UDS has this authentication mechanism called seed key exchange. So by the end of this workshop, I'm going to build you up to the point where you can break some real seed key exchange routines that have been found on cars and trucks. So follow along with your laptop open, do the challenges. It'll be worth it by the end. And make sure you DM Flagbot with your answers. This workshop could consume about 4 hours. I will just cut stuff as we go to make sure we get to the cool stuff at the end. And of course, I think we will need a bio break in a 3-hour session. So we will like take breaks in certain challenges and stuff like that. I'll try to keep the pace going. Okay. So first up, and possibly most importantly, is I'm going to say crypto a lot. Like in this workshop, I'm probably going to say it 2,000 plus times. Every single time I say crypto, no, we would. So someone in the audience gestured like we drink, which is really a good reaction, but we would be hammered by the end of this if we did that. So do not drink when I say crypto. Every time I say crypto, I mean cryptography. I do not mean crypto coins or cryptocurrency or any other crypto stuff. So this is an important chart to remember. Crypto means cryptography, just sometimes crypto in orange, right? Okay. Let's just get going. Let's get into it. Now, I promised you that there will not be much math. Technically, this is not math. This is notation. Okay, so I'm not making you do any math. This is just notation. Why am I showing you notation? Because if you become really enamored with crypto and breaking crypto, on your journey, you will eventually have to look up papers. Okay, you don't need to know a lot of math to make sense of a paper, but you do have to be able to read their notation. That's all I'm doing. I'm just arming you with how to read the notations that you might find in crypto papers. So you might see this, E equals curly braces M subscript K. In this case, it's a symmetric encryption routine. The key here is K. The M is the plain text, and the E is the ciphertext, okay? These are the terms of an encryption system. Start to make them part of you. encryption is really this one-way operation that only becomes bidirectional. It only becomes reversible if you have the key. If someone gives you something and you don't need the key to undo it, it's not technically encryption. That is like the definition of encryption. You need that key to undo the encryption operation. Some examples of real encryption are AES, right? The Advanced Encryption Cipher, RSA. I think that's Reed Shamir and I don't know, a third guy, super smart, not me, because they're very smart and I'm not. ECC is elliptic curve cryptography, and 3DES is actually triple DES. So there was a cipher called DES, and it got broken by someone named Michael Wiener, who actually lives in Ottawa, another Ottawa connection. And then their solution was, well, we'll just run DES 3 times. And, triple DES is also breakable. But these are, encryption schemes. Okay. At the bottom of this slide, you will see something that might be given to you as encryption, but it's not. It's not encryption. You don't need a key to undo that thing at the bottom. And if you do CTFs, or if you ever like program computers, you know what that is. It's an encoding, and it's base 64. Okay, so we're gonna get right into it. Here is your first hands-on challenge. I'll give you roughly 10 minutes. You should have that PDF downloaded, the answers redacted PDF. Fair warning, if you want to cheat, you can just copy text underneath my blocks of color in that PDF. Don't do that. You're not doing yourself any favors, but you can, obviously, if you need to solve something. You should be able to quote unquote decrypt these things. Okay. Why am I calling it quote unquote decrypt? Because when you're doing security analysis or pen testing or whatever your offensive function is on crypto, you will often be given things that developers will say, don't worry, it's encrypted. And your job is to not take their word for it, right? And figure out what is it actually. So you may be given these things, and then you can demonstrate to them that you can decrypt them. Okay. When you have decrypted these things, send your answer to Flagbot. Flagbot will tell you if you're right or not. I am up here to answer questions and go. Yeah, open up Discord, go to the workshop channel. Yeah. Yeah, it's on the homepage of it is, right? Yeah. So one of my favorite ways to mess with stuff is actually with something called Jupyter Notebooks. Does anyone use Jupyter Notebooks in here? No? Has anyone used Python? You have used Jupyter. Yeah, because that workshop, yeah. Python, anyone hate Python? I hate Python. You hate Python? I hate Python. But everything is written in Python. Like all the security stuff is just written in Python, right? Except for maybe Metasploit, which actually Metasploit moved from Ruby to Python. So yeah, Python 1. Python 1. They used to be Ruby.
They are Ruby. I think they still are. I see Ruby.
Okay, my bad. Yeah. Except for Ruby. Except for, which I hate more. Which I hate. So you can actually run Jupyter Notebooks and they give you this little web page. So you can actually like install Jupyter Notebooks by doing like Python m pip install notebook. It's really that easy, and you get it. And then you can run it by doing m Jupyter notebook, and it'll start like this big stuff that dumps out at you. And one of them is this website that you can visit. So we can go visit that website and you get like this nice thing. And it's actually just Python right here. And we actually can do decoding, just like it says here. So you can use this command to decode the things that we see here. It is possible. So that's this one here. All right. But that actually wasn't the first challenge in the slide deck, right? There's actually two challenges. There's actually two Easter eggs before this challenge as well, in case you're trying to get 100% completion with FlagBot. If you haven't tried Jupyter Notebooks, I do recommend them. It can be really useful. It also will help sort of at the end of this workshop when we do UDSC key exchange. You'll already kind of know what you're doing there. Does anyone need any help with anything? Don't be shy to ask. Right. So the question is, would I recommend using CyberChef to do the challenges in the workshop? Yeah, 100%. You can do almost all the challenges in the workshop with CyberChef. It's so flexible. It's also a great way to like interactively see what you're doing, which is really nice as opposed to scripting. There are a couple challenges that you do need to kind of use scripts or something a little more in depth than CyberChef, but great tool, very great tool. Has anybody got one? One of them? Two of them? Anybody got two? Okay, good. So there's also this Easter egg right on the front page, right? Which is again, non-encryption, right? This hex string here is no more encryption than base 64 is. I'm just showing you UTF-8 or ASCII characters in a giant hexadecimal number. That's really the same thing as base 64. It's just a different encoding, right? So if someone tries to tell you base 64 is encryption, you can tell them that they are 100% lying. It is not. It is not encryption. It does not require this key to decrypt. Therefore, it is not. Is anybody still working on this challenge? No? Okay. We can move on. So you all got the 3. If you didn't get the 3, I'll just run them here so you can see them. NorthSec height, because I'm always hyped for NorthSec. NSEC, and then it's pronounced JOD. So that was like part of the CTF last year. There was this GOD system that you had to interact with. And Laurent's joke was like, it's not pronounced God, it's pronounced JOD, because, you know, GIF. I don't know. I thought that was really funny. So I integrated that. Again, there are 2 other Easter eggs before that if you're trying to go 100% completion. And we'll carry on. We got a lot of stuff to do. So the next building block that we need to cover after just encryption is called hashes. Hashes have a lot of different names. You'll see them referred to as one-way functions. You'll see them referred to as random functions, shortcut functions, compression functions, digests, and then sometimes they mix it up like one-way compression functions and trapdoor functions and all this stuff. But really, you're just talking about these particular transformations that are supposed to be one-way, but there's no key here, right? Encryption is a one-way transformation that could be undone with the key. A hash doesn't have a key. It's actually designed so that you can't undo it. Now, in the general case, there's a lot of hashes in computer science. People use them for like hash buckets, right? Or, you know, like different kinds of tree and data structures and stuff like that. But not every hash is actually a cryptographic hash, right? The things you should use in crypto systems are cryptographic hashes, and they're not general hashes. To make it more complicated, what actually is a cryptographic hash changes over time. So a good example here is when I started this slide deck, SHA-1 was a cryptographic hash. Since then, NIST has actually said, no, SHA-1's deprecated. So no longer is SHA-1 a cryptographic hash. MD5 has been deprecated for a while. It used to be a cryptographic hash. It is no longer a cryptographic hash. So it's 2 things. Not every hash function is a cryptographic hash, and even cryptographic hashes that used to be good enough are no longer good enough, right? So yeah, the definition is that you can't guess X if you have the output f of X. You can't find that input. It's no way to undo it. But of course, this is a workshop on how you break crypto. So that's not always true. You can find the inputs to these things, and we're going to talk about how to do it. But yeah, theoretically, you shouldn't be able to find the inputs for those 2 orange hashes there in the 4th bullet. But you can, and you will. The next building block that we need to talk about is classic crypto versus modern crypto. For the person that just joined, I don't want to single you out. You will have a better time if you have your laptop out. Go to the workshops channel, get the PDF. There's a lot of hands-on challenges throughout the workshop. Or you can sit and audit. That's fine too. So there's like classic crypto and modern crypto. And the really big difference here is that classic crypto deals with alphabets. And because of, you know, like the Roman Empire and where crypto comes from, it deals with the 26 character Roman based alphabet. That's kind of what classic crypto is. Okay. Modern crypto is different in that it uses numbers. And of course, because no good rule goes without an exception, there are hybrid crypto systems that sit in between, and you might find things that are like classic, but they use numbers as well, and things get muddy. But in the general, or in the first strike, you're talking about classic using letters, modern using numbers. And when you put text into a modern crypto system, you do that by starting with an encoding, right? That hex string I showed you on the first slide, that's UTF-8 encoded text. I just showed you the hexadecimal values. But like when you print it, what you see on this slide here is also hexadecimal values inside this PowerPoint slide, but it's printing as letters because it knows UTF-8 or ASCII values get shown as these letters. So these modern crypto systems use numbers, but the text that goes in as numbers is the ASCII encoding of that text. Okay. And yeah, mostly classic stuff will show up in puzzles, CTFs, reverse engineering sometimes. There are examples of classic that are important to remember: the substitution cipher and the rotation cipher in particular, the Caesar cipher, and rotate by 13. Always try rotate by 13. Stream ciphers, next building block. Okay. So classic crypto was kind of broken by frequency analysis, and then people moved on. So how can we actually make better crypto systems? There is, it might surprise you to know, a theoretically perfect cryptographic system. There is a perfect encryption. It's called a one-time pad. And you can prove that it's perfect mathematically. I'm not going to make you do math, but you can use Shannon's entropy theory and his theory of information show that like a one-time pad is in fact a perfect cipher. The trick is that the pad, which is like the key, has to be the same length as the data that you're going to encrypt. And it's just not tractable to ship around keys that are big enough for every piece of data you ever want to encrypt and send to somebody else. You'd have to have duplicate pads. You'd have to have terabytes of pads and a way to replace them. That system has been used in the past. Like famously, secret agents in World War II actually had strips of silk that they could hide in their clothing. And when they were receiving messages, often from like number stations and things like that, they would decode off their pad, rip it, and then burn the silk. And like the two ends always had to have synchronized pads, and the pad had to be long enough that they could always have enough information to do this against. But anyhow, that is the one-time pad. The stream cipher was developed to approximate the one-time pad, right? So recognizing that you can't ship infinite keys around to everybody, how could we possibly ship out something that'll approximate this infinite key? So they come up with different ways to make key streams. Start with one number and then continue to run this calculation to make a stream of numbers that like approximate the pad. And that's what the stream cipher does. It's always this key stream. It's always XORed against the key stream. And the reason why it's XOR has to do with like maximal change of entropy, but it's always XOR. And then they take the information, they XOR it with the key stream, and then you have the ciphertext. So the same thing we saw before: plain text, key, ciphertext. The key in this case is actually a key stream. The plain text is of equal length to the key stream, and the ciphertext is of the same length as well. Examples of this are RC4, Salsa 20, Fish. You'll note here that there is an initialization vector involved in stream ciphers because you have to kind of figure out what's that first value at the beginning of this recursive operation, right? What is that first value I stick in there? That's called the IV. Good crypto systems do not require you to hide the IV. That's like one of the things about an IV is that it should be something you can see. That doesn't always end up being true, but it's not something you should have to keep secret. When you're seeing XOR in literature, you might see it in this letter form, XOR. You might see it with a circle with a plus, and you might see it with a caret. These are all symbols that mean XOR in different contexts. Again, I'm not making you do math. This is just notation. It's just notation so you know what you're looking at in the future. Okay, so stream ciphers have this other issue where if you're trying to create a key stream, the key stream can never repeat. Remember this fact that when you're using XOR, if you ever XOR things together and one of them repeats, you have lost. And I'll show you how you can actually break XOR when things repeat. So they run into this problem where the key stream has this point where it repeats because it's not an infinite pad. It's something that approximates the infinite pad. What do we do in the cases when the key stream is repeating? They developed a mechanism called block ciphers. Block ciphers are a way to repeat the same operation over and over again on your plaintext in chunks and then combine them in certain ways. And how you do the combinations of the blocks is where you get the different modes. So if you've ever looked at like certificate configurations or TLS configurations, you've probably seen these acronyms like CBC, CFB, CTR, hopefully GCM. That's probably one of the best ones, right? Because GCM actually has built-in integrity. You hopefully have never seen ECB in your configurations. ECB is technically a mode for block cipher, but there's no chaining. You can see in this diagram here, ECB, which is the electronic code book, just passes the same operation block by block with no chaining. So this has the property that like structure in the plain text ends up showing as repeated structure in the ciphertext. And that's why a lot of people actually call ECB electronic coloring book. And we will show you why people call it that in a little bit. Okay. So we covered stream ciphers, block ciphers, hashes, basic encryption. Everything I told you about basic encryption so far is what's known as symmetric encryption. When I showed you that equation, that notation for encryption, there was a single key. And that key has to be known by the sender and the receiver. It's a shared key, or also known as PSK, a pre-shared key, sometimes also called a shared secret, sometimes called a secret. These are all synonyms for symmetric cryptography. Asymmetric cryptography was invented to solve the problem of sharing keys. It actually makes a pair of keys, a public and a private key. The public key isn't even really a key. I mean, it can be used for functions, but you should think of the public key as an address. You can give it to anybody. Anybody can know it. And if they know the public key, they can send information to whoever owns or holds the private key. So the public key is really like an address. And this asymmetric crypto allows various operations to happen in a way that separates the privilege. With the private key, you're able to do decryption. But with the public key, you're able to do encryption. So people can take that public part, that address, encrypt using that public part, and send it to you and know that because you're the only person that has that private half, only you can decrypt it. So it actually separates the privilege of encryption from decryption. Whereas in symmetric crypto, it's the same key for both operations. It's a pre-shared key. So asymmetric crypto is like what helps us buy things on the internet, right? It's very important. You can build other stuff with asymmetric crypto, like authentication, meaning you can actually sign some data with the private key and verify that, yeah, in fact, it was that person that signed it using just the public key. So that public key, private key can be used for encrypt, decrypt, but also the reverse of it can be used for verification for like, is this thing authentic? You can use the public key to authenticate something. It's pretty cool. You might see RSA, you might see ECC, hopefully ECC these days. ECC is faster and with the right parameters is stronger as well. And then you might see it in certificates. This is a snip from the 2023 badge firmware that they published. So that's the beginning of their certificate there in the build system. Right. So I stood up here for a while and I talked at you about crypto basic blocks. I hope this is what you were expecting. If not, there's just a lot more of this coming. So apologies. I'm going to finish up the sections like this, where I'm just going to repeat what I said. I hope you don't find that boring. I hope it helps you internalize it. Okay. So we talked about encryption. Encryption is all about hiding information. It gives you confidentiality guarantees, but it does not necessarily give you integrity guarantees unless you do something extra. We talked about hashes. They have many, many names, right? But they're always one-way functions. If you have the output of that function, f of x, you cannot get x. That's what a hash is supposed to do, a cryptographic hash. I told you about classic crypto, which is all about alphabets, not numbers, and modern crypto is about numbers. I told you about stream ciphers, right? And the one-time pad, the theoretically totally secure cipher, and how stream ciphers approximate that by creating a key stream, but that all key streams eventually repeat. And so it never completely satisfies the one-time pad. Told you about block ciphers and in particular ECB, the electronic coloring book, which is bad. And if you're gonna today pick a block cipher, you should pick something that gives you integrity like GCM, which is a great, just pick that configuration and use it. And then of course the difference between symmetric crypto, which is also known as secret, pre-shared key, shared secret crypto, and asymmetric crypto, which comes with two flavors, private and public keys. So that's the section. Does anyone have any questions, sorry, on the material from this section? Did I do anything too fast for you? Would you like me to say anything else about these? Logan.
Electronic coloring book and what
Same key. Yeah, so same key per block. And then, of course, you can imagine that because it's the same key per block, if you don't do smart things with this mixing and carrying forward, then you could start compromising that key.
Okay.
Very welcome. Good question. Okay, we are going to move on. And this is kind of how the course is going to go. We talk about the building blocks, and then we talk about how are you going to break the building blocks, because that's why you're here, to break shit, right? Hashes. You should not be able to figure out what the input is of a hash. Has anyone here played CTFs? So you know that that's not true, right? You can find the input of hashes. Have you tried Googling those hashes from the previous slides? You should always just Google hashes. Like seriously, copy that string right now and put it into Google. That is one of the flags. Okay. Part of like the hardest part of when you just have a hash in hand is figuring out like, well, what hash is this? And if you're going to try to use a tool like Hashcat or John the Ripper or something, when you're just given a string, you might not know what kind of hash it is. There are tools that help, like SciPanda's hash ID, but also Googling stuff will tell you, like if you stick that into Google and it'll say, oh, that's an MD5 or oh, that's a SHA-1, then you know the other hashes you found with it are also MD5s and SHA-1s. You can use context, right? Hashcat's a great tool for using your GPU to crack things. And remember, you can't actually undo hashing. So the way these things work is they just try all kinds of inputs and they run the hash forward until they find a match. And when they find a match using the forward operation, then they say, yeah, okay, we did it. We cracked the hash. That's what cracking is. And well before like GPUs could crack things with Hashcat, there was websites, these hash cracking sites, and people would pay subscriptions to like get these things cracked. And the cool thing is that the hash cracking sites actually let Google index their sites. So the reason why you can just Google a lot of hashes is just because of the power of Google indexing and people allowing scraping of information, which is pretty cool. If that didn't exist, or if you find a hash that you can't just hashcat, there are things called rainbow table attacks on hashes. For MD5, it's not really that hard to make a rainbow table, but when you get to like SHA-1, it ends up being like 6 terabytes. The data duplication village does let you actually pick up rainbow tables. If you go to the data duplication village, you bring a 6 terabyte hard drive, they will give you a copy of the tables that they pre-generated, which is cool. And then people like Angel Bertini and other really smart people done stuff with extension attacks to hashes that we're not going to cover, but there's always a way to try to short circuit or meet in the middle or try to defeat the cost of forward computation of these hashes to break them. Okay. So yeah, this is a great example called Shattered. This was kind of the impetus for marking SHA-1 as deprecated. You're looking at two PDFs that are obviously not the same PDF, but they do have the same SHA-1 hash. This was the Shattered attack. It was a combination of a hash extension where they started with like known beginnings to the hash and then changed little bits, and also a PDF polyglot where they carefully chose pieces of the PDF to change to make two valid PDFs that have the exact same signature, exact same digest, which is pretty cool. Right. So the fact that you could use rainbow tables, the fact that you could refer to cracking sites known for a very long time. And so many systems actually salt their hashes. A salt is a little piece of information that will either be prepended on the input data or appended on the input data, sometimes with a separator, sometimes not. How it's done is system dependent. And the value of the salt is also usually system dependent when done right. In many cases, it's more like source code dependent when done wrong. So like open source projects tend to share the same salt in all deployments, like Shadow, for example, right? But salt could defeat a lot of this cracking or predefined lists of hashes if it was done correctly. Um, but Hashcat actually knows how to find a salt if you know the input already. So if you say, I know that the input to this thing is admin, and I know it has like a 3-letter salt, Hashcat, can you just go and find the salt for me that will give me this hash, given the fact that I know the real thing is admin? It can do that. And it also knows how to like do the opposite, where like, I know the salt is this, I know the hash is this. Can you now go and try to find the thing? Like Hashcat knows how to handle salted hashes. So you're not dead in the water. And the great thing about you as an attacker against salts is like once you find the salt of the system, that's the salt for the whole system, right? It's reusable for all the other hashes that you find in that system. Salts aren't like keys. They're deployed for one configuration, might be the most granular. In many cases, it's like one software deployment. So it's all the versions of that software. Uh, yes, go ahead. No. Yeah, it's much more common to have it as part of like the software package source code or to have it as a configuration time deployment. If you have it like per user, you end up having to show it somewhere and store it somewhere. And then it's not exactly a salt because it's not, it's if it's stored right beside it, then it's just information you can read and you just know how to mix it in. Maybe, yeah, yeah. It would. It would prevent rainbow tables. Right. Yeah. So point from the front row, it would still prevent rainbow tables. That's true. That's true. Very good. But you know how to break it now. That's the most important part. More attacking hashes is really about word lists. Okay. So use the context of what you're at. Whenever you start something, you should always start by like making a list of the words you've seen, right? So this workshop in particular is no exception. Developers are lazy, people are lazy, stuff gets put together with reused words. So you'll actually in CTFs you'll find the RockU list is the most common, and I think with NorthSec it's kind of like the rule that in the NorthSec CTFs the password is in RockU. It's also common in most CTFs. If you're doing like an engagement, you should use something like a scraper or a crawler and put together a word list and start from that. So word lists are really your best way forward. Which brings us to our next challenge, 15-minute challenge breaking these hashes, right? Theoretically, you should not be able to do this, but of course you will be able to do it. And you're going to do it by using Google. You're going to do it by using Hashcat, and you're going to do it by using word lists. You got this. Yeah.
But just remove the.
Yeah, I
flag.
think there is one that is a collision, you're right.
Okay.
Anyway, and then Flagbot might be like, yeah, I removed the role.
But not in the same, because, well,
Yeah, I
I'm
think
on
one of
spot.
them does, yeah.
But there is another one here that collides with something from a previous challenge?
Yes,
Okay,
yes, that's correct. That's a limitation of Flagbot.
okay.
It knows all of them. The only one is that there is one of these things that will undo a roll.
Yeah, I can make it.
Okay, but all the other ones, Flagbot knows them. No, there's 5 unique ones. Hashcat. Hashcat. Who has all the Googles? Everyone have all the Googles? No, you haven't Googled them yet? Okay, I'll wait for you to Google them before I show them. But Google all these.
Google is the first.
4. So this has happened to me before where like my stuff has been crawled and then cracked.
No, it's not on a
First
website that's intended for cracked hashes, but it's there.
Did you find it on Cybertruck?
Something about nicknames.
Oh yeah, the nickname site.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But I tried. So.
No, you're right. Yeah, you're right.
And one of those has a collision with the previous challenge, the NSEC.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I got that one. Okay, I see what. Yeah. Now.
Yeah, so the first 4 are actually Googleable today. And then the last one requires hashcat. So one of the neat things about Jupyter notebooks is you can actually like run shell scripts in them. So you can import sys, and then this sys executable is actually a reference to the Python that you're running in. So I can in one cell install that hash ID tool, and then run the hash ID tool on that 5F hash that we saw, this first one right there. You shift enter and run that. And it'll give us a little bit of info. In this case, because it is an MD5, there's a lot of things that are the same length as MD5. So there's a lot of like potential hits, but as with everything, you should always assume the simplest thing, right? Assume and move forward. There's also probably a better example is the next one. You'll get less hits with this 5BAA one, right? So SHA-1 being the most likely, so that's what it is. And then, yeah, if we Google everything, we get, yeah, sorry, I made a comment for everything, so didn't like that. Oh yeah, I forgot to build my word list. Okay, so this is what happens with Python. If you're in a Jupyter notebook, you run some code, the errors of it show up in red. And it's reminding me that I didn't build my word list, which is a reminder to you, you should be building your word list. So what words have we encountered already? We've seen baloney, NorthSec height, NSEC height, 2024, JOD admin, salt admin. These have all shown up in the challenges and the Easter eggs so far. What else did we get? Did anybody get the Caesar cipher in the classic crypto slide? Okay, so in that Caesar cipher, it was rot 13, and it was, oh, I need to import my codex. It was rot 13. It said, don't decipher this. So that means we should also extend our word list with don't decipher and this. And yeah, now we have a pretty decent word list. So now we can run this. And you see, so I Googled this hash. I saw that it was password, so I added password. I Googled this hash, it was also password. I Googled this hash, that was JOD on the nickname site. On the nickname site. So this one I actually intended to use hashcat with a like a short character brute force, but it's not necessary, obviously. This one ended up being NSEC, so I add that. And then there's one left that we don't know. This one here is not Googleable. Right? This 21DEC 99ACC, blah, blah. So we know it's an MD5, right? Because this one was an MD5. So this one is also an MD5. And I think on the slide, I give you a hint about it. It's got a 3-character salt. And the salt is appended, which means at the end of the word. And there's no separator. And hashcat actually has a mode for this. Hashcat has a mode for appended salt, no separator. And that's this one here. So we're going to solve this 21DEC with hashcat. Is anyone trying hashcat? You are? Okay, I'll let you try it. I'll let you try it. So there's a lot of hands-on challenges.
Yeah, I didn't break my leg.
Oh, okay. That's okay. Is anyone still hashcatting? I'm just coming up. I'll give you 2 more minutes to hashcat. Spoil it for you.
So we have a word list, right? And the word list, if you're gonna do cracking and stuff like that, you want to make sure that it's unique. So a really easy way to make a unique word list in Python is to sort the list, use set to make it unique, and then turn it back into a list. A unique word list. What we're gonna do is prepare a hashes file for Hashcat. So we're gonna write out that hash that we're targeting, and then colon the word in the word list. Because when you're doing salt attacks with Hashcat, it wants you to like do this pre-formatted or like pre-computed hash calculation. So let's look at the contents. It wants you to have a file like this, where all of these could be the password. And then if it gets it right, it's going to put another colon on the end and the salt. This is how Hashcat treats salted passwords. It has like, this is the password as the input. Usually when you do Hashcat, it's a file that just has hashes on the line. But when you're doing salted hashes, it's the hash and the possible password. And then it's going to add another one on the end if it gets it. All right, so again, Jupyter Notebooks let you run system commands right from them. So, you know, and I'm on Windows, so I know I'm weird, but this is Windows, and I could just spawn Hashcat from here. The only tricky part is the Hashcat executable for Windows doesn't have a current working directory. It runs in like app data or something. So you have to use this full path for things. But I'm just telling Hashcat, there's a mode. 20 is the mode for password, appended salt, no separator. I'm asking it to do a pattern attack with 3 alphanumeric characters on the end, and I'll give it the input as the hashes. And of course, I've run this before, so it's going to be even faster. And then the way that you, no, it's not very fast. Okay, it's done. The way that you get Hashcat to tell you if it's done the thing is to use this show argument on the end. And there it is. So you see like the input for the salted hash was actually this NorthSec line from up here, and the salt is Jod. Yes.
So in the example of hashes, the mode 20, so it's defined salt on the first part, and password on the end.
No, I think it's the other way around.
I have the table on the guide, and it's actually one separated with 2 points.
I don't know what to tell you. I'll open up what I used to generate it just to double check. But I mean, you guys might be too advanced for this workshop. Perhaps. No, I generated it by appending, no separator, Jod. So maybe the documentation isn't accurate.
Yeah, I'm more.
No, I believe that you're reading the right thing, but it also doesn't match with how I generated the hash. So one of the things can't work. Maybe the documentation's out of date. This is the command I ran. So okay. That's where we're at. Alrighty. I hope you guys got that. And don't forget that there are like Easter eggs in the other slides if you're bored, and Flagbot will tell you if you're getting these things right. So go ahead and send your stuff to Flagbot. Let's move on to attacking classic crypto. So remember, classic crypto is alphabet based, not numbers based. Historically, something called frequency analysis broke classic crypto, right? Has anyone ever seen Wheel of Fortune? Yeah. Okay. So showing your age for sure. I think I'm the only other person in the room that knows what Wheel of Fortune is. When people played Wheel of Fortune, they always started with certain letters because like the way the game was, it would show these blocks and you had to try to guess the phrase. Maybe if you've played Hangman, has anyone played Hangman? Yeah, same idea, right? You want to ask for R and S and T and L and E because these are very common English letters. So frequency analysis is like that. You take a really large piece of ciphertext, and for frequency analysis to work, it has to be large, and you count how many times each symbol shows up. And then you start guessing that maybe the really frequent
symbols are R. Maybe the really frequent symbols are S, T, etc. That's frequency analysis. That broke classic crypto. There was a cat and mouse with various different kinds of classic crypto that worked against, like polyalphabetic, et cetera, et cetera. But for the most part, classic crypto is dead. Okay. And we're talking about modern crypto today. If you run into classic crypto today, it's probably a puzzle or it might be a reverse engineering challenges. Always try ROT13 because I'm not just in CTF challenges, also in software. There seems to have been this reason why developers use ROT13. I don't know, but it keeps showing up. If ROT13 doesn't work, try a substitution cipher. So go to like QuipQuip or rumkin.com and then just try other stuff. Generally speaking, it's going to be something weird. Okay. So that brings us to our next hands-on challenge. I won't give you 10 minutes for this. We'll just do it real quick in 2 minutes. Something like QuipQuip should be able to just solve this for you. Just throw it up. Put your hand up when you get it. I'm sure you guys probably got it like 10 minutes ago. Okay, very good. Yeah, so frequency analysis. Yeah. So I did the frequency analysis here. These are the frequency of the things in the ciphertext. So maybe like E in the ciphertext is actually B, maybe it's A, depends, right? You would just try things. Just try them all. Rumkin has a way to try that automatically. Did you try ROT13? You should have. Always try ROT13. And of course, this comes from the very first Cybertruck, which I pitched to you at the beginning. Again, if you know any students that like to hack things, they should go to Cybertruck. Okay. What about stream ciphers, right? So remember, the stream cipher is a way to approximate the one-time pad. It always involves XOR of the key stream against the plain text. And there's actually like a problem with XOR when things repeat. Okay. So this is probably the only math that you really have to do. I apologize, but there's no other way to really explain this. If you know the output of an XOR, A combined with B, and you actually know A or you know B, you can undo that combination, right? Because I can take A XOR B mixed together, and I can XOR it again with B, and it undoes the B part, and I'm left with A. Or I can take that combination of A XOR B, and I can XOR it again with A, and it undoes the A part, and I'm left with B. Because XOR like exclusively flips the bits. So you can undo it by sticking in the same information, right? And this is where stream ciphers go wrong when the key repeats. If you have XOR and something eventually repeats, you now have a way to undo the operation, okay? So if the key gets reused, here's an example. You might have E1, which is A XOR the key, and E2, which is B XOR the key, but you can actually get a mix of A and B by XORing E1 and E2. And you might be thinking, well, I didn't get A, I didn't get B. How did I win, right? Why is getting A mixed with B actually winning? That's a very good question. It can be a win if you can make assumptions about what A or B is. If you know, for example, that A or B is probably UTF-8 ASCII text, well, that's a pretty small space to start searching in. You could just start searching through A through B and seeing if things start making sense. Maybe you know it's firmware, okay? With firmware, all Fs is really, really common, right? So maybe A or B is actually all Fs. Have you tried that? If it's like a database file, sparse databases fill a lot of stuff with zeros. Maybe A or B is zeros. So you don't win immediately with AX or B, but it gets you to the point where if you can make assumptions on A or B, you can now start undoing that mixing, right? Which brings us to our next hands-on challenge. This one you can do with CyberChef. I know you asked about CyberChef. I love CyberChef as a tool, and it can do this just using the XOR block and the one of them you have to do the from hex to turn it into binary to put it into the XOR, and then in the XOR block you can use the key as hex, but you still have to use one from hex in CyberChef. So Flagbot wants the key. So there's three things you can get here. You can get the plain texts, and after you get the plain text, you can also get the key. Because what I'm showing you here is E1 and E2, and always assume the worst thing. I reused the key. So this is A XOR K, and the second one is B XOR K. So after you get A and B, you can undo it again to get the key. Flagbot wants the key in hexadecimal form with no leading 0x, just the hex. And the plain texts it wants, like, just type them in as ASCII. I think I have another hint here. It's all about XOR. That should not be a surprise for you. You can use CyberChef. And yeah, key is 64 bits. Okay. Yes. Yeah. So it's thinking about this, right? So on that slide, I gave you E1 and I gave you E2 and I reused the key. So start by actually in XORing E1 and E2. And what you're going to have is a mix of A and B. But like, remember what we do about attacking things? We use word lists, right? It's all about context. There's probably a good probability that A and B, those plain texts, are things you have seen before. Because I'm lazy, but also implementers are lazy too, right? I'm not just being lazy for your benefit. I'm being lazy because it's relevant. That help? CyberChef is good. CyberChef can do this, and it has a nice interactive feel to it while you're doing it too.
Anyone got it? Got one, got two, nothing. This one is tricky. This is probably the trickiest one in the hands-on. Does anyone just feel totally stuck? Don't know what the heck I'm supposed to do. That's fair. I'm sorry to do that to you. The XOR thing is like a little bit tricky to get your head around. The Cyber Chef can be really good when you're trying to play with this thing. Does anyone want me to show you Cyber Chef, or do you want to look at Python code? So hands up for Python code. Come on, why does everyone hate Python? It's okay. I get it. I hate Python too. You want me to show you how to do it in Cyber Chef? We can do that. Okay, so the way you want to do this in Cyber Chef is you want to make a recipe that starts with the from hex, and into that you're going to put one of these ciphers. Okay. And then we know that we're going to want to XOR this thing. So we take the XOR, we stick that in there too. We know we're going to have like a hex key. So this is just like, they call it a key in Cyber Chef. It's really just the other thing you're going to XOR. It's the second argument. So we'll put in the other cipher. Okay. So then just to make our life kind of easier, we'll do hex dump. And hex dump is useful because it shows you the hex, and then it also shows you the ASCII, like the printables. Right? So what we have here, this output, is actually this, right? It's A and B together. A and B are mixed. But we should always operate under the assumption that we know what A or B is because people are lazy, so it's probably one of the things from the word list, right? Same assumption. So how can we get access to like just A? If we start guessing what B is, and we start like XORing with things that B might be, we might see A start to leak out, right? So what we want to think about is another XOR. We're going to stick that in here before the hex dump. This time we're going to use a UTF-8 key, and then we're going to start using words from the word list. So who remembers a word from the word list? Jod, 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 Jod. So this is also a really common thing in crypto systems. When you have something that's too short, it just repeats. Okay, so Jod, Jod, Jod. I don't see anything there. Anyone else? What other things came from the word list? NorthSec. NorthSec. Everyone see that? See what happened when I did that? Right? So I type in N, right? And if I just like repeat it, it's like, okay, so D is printable. This is looking good. What if I do NSEC? No, that doesn't look right. But if I do NOR, see, as I do that, watch the printables down here, right? RTH. Because the XOR is bytewise, right? It's doing an XOR per byte on each of these things. And we started with A mixed with B. And then we just made a guess. What if B is one of these things in the word list? So we did A XOR B XOR B guess. And when we made the B guess match B, it disappeared. And all we were left with was A. Okay. So now we have the two plaintexts are NorthSec and Decipher. We know both plaintexts. But we could, in fact, get the key, right? So now we can do another XOR, because it's just XOR all the way down. And this time we'll actually stick back in the ciphertext. And you can see that it's A, 0, defeated. Defeated. That's the key. Right? So you defeat XOR with more XOR. It's just a question of what you're sticking into the arguments. I hope that kind of explains. Does anyone have any questions? I know this one is the weirdest. So please do ask questions if it doesn't make sense. Please.
So the question is like, if you didn't have any idea that one of the inputs, one of the A or B was NorthSec, or that it came from a short word list, how would you brute force this? To brute force something like this, you have to have a success condition. So you have to like operate under the assumption that the result would be ASCII. Safe assumption. So you would set up like a function that tested the output and said, yes, this output is ASCII. And if it said that, you'd be like, wait, stop what you're brute forcing. I want to look at it. So that's kind of like step number one. You have to have that success assumption. And then the next one is like, yeah, brute forcing could just be literally movie hacking, going through every byte, XOR, trying again and again and again. It'd be expensive. You might make that less expensive by being like, well, it's probably in the ROCU list. Make that guess, sorry. Or maybe you have even better context where like you went to the website, you scraped all the employee names, you scraped all the product names, you've mixed in dates and years and things like that, and you've built like a targeted word list. And if you're missing any of that, then you have to go to like, well, maybe it's a MAC address, or maybe it's like the serial number that I saw, or maybe it's like that token thing that I saw yesterday. You know, like it's either movie hacking, which is expensive. And when I say movie hacking, I mean like literally, did anyone watch Terminator 2? Yeah. And he like hacks the pin code by just trying every number and then trying every number and trying. That's movie hacking. It's very expensive. Or you have some kind of word list or some kind of guess. I don't think there's anything in between. The other one, I can show you some shitty Python. Yeah. Yeah. An actual XOR tool. Not that I'm aware of. I think it's in the realm of like people's shitty Python. I think that's the realm it lives in. Yeah. Or people's shitty Ruby, if that's what you're into, which happens. My pleasure. It's a good question. And are there any other questions on attacking XORs? This is the weirdest one. We're gonna go into. You can just listen to me for a while, which may or may not be a good thing, but you're gonna have to listen to me for a while. Yeah. Exactly right. Exactly right. So in a CTF, the word list is known as ROCU, and there's flavors. There's like the ROCU 200, which is the 200 most common, and then there's 1,000, 2,000. But like the canon in a CTF is it's the ROCU list. But then the word list might be something you made by scraping their website, putting together by going to LinkedIn. Like it's just literally a list of words. Sure. Definitely mix in birth dates, 100%. Good question. All right. With apologies, you're going to have to listen to me talk for a good long stretch. But we did it. We broke XOR as promised. And that is really the hardest part. When you get to block ciphers, actually attacking block ciphers kind of becomes impractical. Okay. It's not something I'm going to have you do as a hands-on. It's not something you're going to do on an engagement or a CTF unless it's like a known vuln and you're like using a toolkit and pushing a button to do the thing. Attacking block ciphers gets really tricky, with the exception of ECB. ECB is like electronic coloring book is kind of broken, and there's all these different kinds of attacks. And if you find yourself in a situation where you need to attack a block cipher, just refer to this slide and then use the terminology here to go do some Googling and look at papers. And best of luck to you. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. It's not something that you should be able to do. Possibly one of the most fruitful attacks on block ciphers is something that's called a oracle attack, or in this case, a padding oracle. There's this really nasty interplay between compression and encryption on servers. And it's happened multiple times now in the past where you could use the error code return back that indicated something was incorrectly compressed as opposed to the error code that indicated it was incorrectly encrypted to leak information about the key. And these oracle attacks in cryptography generally give you one bit of key at a time, and you just kind of guess, get an error, guess, get an error. You just go back and forth and get one bit at a time. That's how oracle attacks work. And the padding oracle attacks work by putting together things that are either incorrectly compressed or incorrectly encrypted and seeing that error result and then guessing the bit as you go. They're definitely practical. You could do these in CTFs. You could do these on an engagement. This is probably the only, other than ECB attacks, the only practical thing you could do attacking block ciphers. So if you come to a system, you know it's block cipher encrypted, but you can see that it supports like gzip plus thing, or like, it has like LZMA plus thing, then you could be like, well, maybe there's a padding oracle. And padding is the difference between like if I gave you JOD, but you had to fit JOD into an 8-byte block, what would you do? Would you repeat JOD? Would you put 000 on the end of JOD? Would you put F on the end of JOD? In a lot of cases, you should actually put random data on the end of JOD, but not all systems do that. And that's where you can break this stuff. Well, what happens is you can actually, so these things work by detecting the difference in error code. So for systems that can tell they have an incorrectly compressed stream, they'll give you back one error for when it's not compressed and a different error for when it's not encrypted. That's how they leak the info. And then stuff gets cool after that, right? And no one's expecting you to do this stuff, but it's things you might want to know about. It's things you might want to research if you start getting into this. A lot of crypto systems were first broken by doing something called linear cryptanalysis, and this is just like correlation analysis. This bit in the output tends to be highly correlated with these bits on the input, and the actual correlations kind of give you guesses about the key. But like AES was designed specifically to like defeat linear cryptanalysis. That's what diffusion is giving you in AES. Beyond that, you have something called differential. So it's not about correlation, it's about sensitivity. Like how likely is the bit on the output to change if these bits over here change? And I'm hand waving and I'm talking about terms because no one's expecting you to do this stuff, but you might read about it. And differential cryptanalysis shows up like in side channel analysis, which is something that you might be able to do if you like bought a chip whisperer, did the whole setup, got your power traces. You could execute that kind of thing without necessarily understanding it at a deep level. And now you know what to Google. So hopefully that arms you for the future. But yeah, reality check. We talked about, the different ways that you can attack things and what those models of attacks are in block ciphers, but you're not going to actually do that yourself. After you have like classic crypto, which could be attacked with frequency analysis, there's not a whole lot of stuff that you can just break on your own, because there's a lot of correct crypto out there and you can't really break correct crypto. But the good news is, for incorrect crypto, if you're involving with XOR, make some guesses, make some assumptions, and start XORing things together, and you might actually be able to undo it, right? So XOR is something that you can attack with assumptions. When there's repetition of data in the ciphertext, you will be able to see that structure repeated with ECB. Electronic coloring book shows you, and I'm going to show you a picture that drives that home, but electronic coloring book actually leaks information by reuse of those blocks. And then after that, Google stuff, but it's not impossible. Even though things are put together with correct crypto, how they're put together is often called the protocol, and the plugging together of correct crypto blocks doesn't always yield a correct crypto system. So a lot of systems that have correct crypto blocks get broken because the protocols aren't put together correctly. So this one, we'll do it as a combined bio break challenge. Okay. This is from a reversing challenge, just for your context. We'll give like a 10-minute bio break / challenge. Okay. So we'll come back in 10 minutes. Someone needs to go get a drink or after the chat. That's CTF players right there. Yeah, it is a reversing challenge. You could just go and reverse these binaries if you wanted to figure out what the answer is. If you're more of a reverser, but this is a crypto workshop, so that would kind of be linked to it. stuck or have any questions? Stuck or have any questions? You do. What's up? Let me look at your screen.
So one at the bottom, potatopla.net is also that one. I think that it's potatopla without a one. So that doesn't surprise me too much. This company was it was Madison from NCC bought Madison, and they used to preserve. It's sad because crypto pals, like what's underneath the box there, crypto pals is like one of the best introductions to crypto. It might be somewhere else. Might be other NCC crypto pals. Yeah.
So what's the format of Blackbot? Because for those, I found those things.
So you almost found the stringness. You did. You almost found it. You definitely found the alphabet parts,
Okay.
but you didn't find the punctuation.
Oh, okay. So I have to check the punctuation.
Hey, we're at time. I hope everyone is feeling good, ready for some more crypto. There's definitely going to be a lot more listening than me talk, which may or may not be a good thing. But let me show you kind of how you can solve these things. So these things right here are what you would call a, yeah, it is. And what was the rotation? How wide was the rotation? How many positions did it shift? Anybody? Three, exactly. Very good. And the important part to get here is that this is the exception to the rule. Okay. So I said, like, there's classic crypto and there's modern crypto. Classic crypto deals with alphabet and modern crypto deals with numbers. This is the kind of exception that you get in like reversing challenges and other kind of like quirky or goofy crypto. This is a rotation cipher applied to ASCII text. And that's why, so someone in the front row got the letters but didn't get the punctuation. You have to actually shift the punctuation characters by the same amount as well. So you do classic crypto on numbers. And that this isn't like genuinely good crypto, but neither is like MD5 a good hash. You still will run into this kind of stuff. So it's great that you're able to solve it. This is the kind of thing that'll be useful when you do all kinds of weird stuff. We can actually like solve this with shitty Python. That probably won't surprise anybody. Because shitty Python can do anything. But yeah, we can like say, okay, try like every letter in 0 to 26 and do this rotation. The trick is you have to rotate in integer, right? But then you have to turn it into a byte so it's printable. And then I just put both together with this slash. And I'm just doing the dumb thing, like show me 26 of these possible shifts. And then there you go, there's the answer. Right? So you don't have to use Rumkin, you don't have to use CyberChef, you certainly can. This stuff is also possible with Python. The hardest part of doing a Python is remembering like when you have to use bytes, when you have to use integers, how you smoosh things together. So there's tricks, right? This like byte quote join is a trick for how you like smush together a whole bunch of bytes. That's one of those things you should just write down. It's always quote dot join. That's how you just do it. And then the into bytes is how you take an integer and then turn it into something that's printable. And then there's this method here that iterates over the bytes. So you can smoosh it together. I just wanted to show you that the Python is possible. Which actually also gives us a couple more words for a word list if we were keeping track of word lists, which we should do. Okay, so let's talk about some more stuff. What about attacking block ciphers? I promised you a picture that shows you why ECB is called Electronic Coloring Book. And this is the picture. I made this picture, but this is a famous picture that predates me. It's Tux the Penguin, and it's Tux the Penguin through ECB. So I took the Tux the Penguin ping file, I ran it through an ECB cipher, and then I fixed the ping header. We've all used ping, fix, and CTFs before. And then here you go, you're looking at the image, right? So that's what happens with ECB. It's the same block, same key, which means like all the alpha 0 transparency stuff around Tux all shows up as this same repeating pattern. And all of Tux's black stuff shows up as this pattern, right? Like you still see Tux, which means that ECB failed. ECB is supposed to give you confidentiality guarantees because it's an encryption method, but it didn't. And this failure extrapolates to other cases, right? So if you're looking at something you know it's ECB encrypted, you can make assumptions about the input to learn things. If it's firmware, whatever block you see the most common is probably what FF through the block looks like, because the most common thing in a firmware image is all Fs. That's just what EEPROM or flash erases to. Databases, the zeros would be the most common. If it's like text, well, maybe your word list tells you what the most common things are, and that appears in the blocks, right? So I hope you're seeing a pattern here. It's always about making an assumption and testing it and seeing if you won. That's the general, how do you break stuff, but very specifically, how do you break crypto? Okay. And of course, there are other attacks on building blocks. Even if you got like an AES 256 GCM, a block cipher encrypted system, and you obviously can't break the communications, what do criminals do, right? What do financially motivated attackers do when they come against a crypto system? They attack the system performing the crypto, right? These systems that are able to do the AES operations, that's a symmetric crypto operation. So that means that if you can get access to that key, you can encrypt and decrypt, right? That's a privileged operation. So information leaks are actually valuable bugs on a piece of software that does shared key encryption, right? And that's like Heartbleed. Heartbleed was kind of like a whatever info leak bug until they escalated to the point where they said, hang on a second, that's TLS servers that are doing symmetric crypto operations. So those shared keys are leaked. And in some cases, they're even using the private key of a public-private pair. So those info leaks are valid. So don't discount an info leak vuln for crypto systems. And of course, like remote code exec, yeah, if you have remote code exec, you can also break crypto systems. No duh, right? All right. So then we have a challenge for the eager beavers in the room that love CTFs. I know we have a few in the room. I'm going to give you a challenge where you actually have to identify a compressed file and an encrypted file and an ECB encrypted file from a set of files. And I won't give you any information about the files. And the way you do this is by actually visualizing what's called entropy. So I mentioned earlier that like the one-time pad is theoretically secure because of Shannon's information theory and the way you can measure entropy. There's an approximation of entropy, like a way you can estimate it. And you're doing this by kind of like measuring how frequent 1 is and how frequent 0 is in a bit stream. And if they're 50-50, that's maximal entropy. And compression systems get like pretty close to getting 50-50 for zeros and ones, but they never get like 99, like 99% of the way to 50%. They're always like 97, 95%. Encryption, like good encryption like AES, will give you like 99% of the way to that 50% split on ones and zeros. And entropy is always expressed as a number between 0 and 1. And a 1 for entropy means exactly 50-50 for zeros and ones. And there's lots of different tools for measuring entropy. And I'll show you some of those. The rules of thumb is that like compression looks pretty high and encryption is like really high, like 99.99. Compression is like 0.95 to 0.97. And I always have this problem with projectors. If you have your laptop screen out and you have the PDF, you're going to see like stripes. You're going to see kind of like dark magenta stripes in these magenta blocks, which you can't see on the projector. So don't look up here. And the image itself has like these dark bands. And what you're seeing is low entropy in the dark band. That means that it's not an even distribution of 1 and 0. It might be like printable characters, a whole bunch of ASCII text. That's low entropy. It has structure. It's not perfectly equal. Like it's not a coin toss to guess whether a 1 comes up or a 0 comes up. With ASCII, it's mostly zeros and a couple ones. So that's low entropy, right? And you can see that in the header of the image in the very first column. And then you look at something like AES ECB and AES CBC, and I actually gave you the two images, right? So we have the ECB tux. You can actually still see tux. CBC, you don't see tux anymore, even though I fixed the ping header. He's gone. Because CBC does a much better way of chaining those blocks and mixing and hiding that information. If we look at the entropy in those two columns, you can't see striations. Both ECB and CBC give you a very high entropy, even though ECB is still broken. You can still guess structure from the output, but the actual blocks where you're measuring entropy over don't have structure. So you will see a very high level of purple for ECB, a very high entropy level, even though it's still broken. That's an important thing to remember when you're trying to do this next file identification challenge. So this one, what we're going to do is I'm not going to sit here and watch you guys do it. For those of you that are really keen and like to do this stuff, you have the link, download the files. The way the flag works is the file names are hashes. So it's going to be like hash equals compressed, hash equals ECB, and hash equals encrypted are the three flags you can give to Flagbot. Okay. You could obviously brute force this challenge by just guessing which ones, but that would be lame and you wouldn't learn anything. So don't do that. Okay. Use entropy visualization. Go use binwalk. Binviz.io is a website that runs entirely in your browser. So it doesn't do any server-side communication. It's safe for analyzing anything, and it'll do visualization of entropy. Yes. Probably. Yeah, probably. Yeah, and so one of them, there's a quirk with Google Drive. When you download them and you'll get a zip, you unzip it, one of them will automatically be detected as HTML. So you actually only have 7 to sift through. But the HTML file is relevant for figuring out the answer. So anyways, 3 flags, file name equals compressed, file name equals ECB, file name equals encrypted. Here's the thing, if you're keen, do it and entertain yourself while you listen to me talk for the next 30 minutes about crypto before we get to the next hands-on challenge. So this is a block where we're not going to have a whole lot of other hands-on challenges. So this is me giving you something to do with your idle hands while I talk. All right. So as I promised, I will do these section summaries. Please do ask questions if something wasn't clear. We talked about how to attack hashes. I did briefly mention, or maybe it was on the slide, that like there are these technical attacks on hashes about finding collisions and finding pre-images, but they're not what you're trying to do. What you're trying to do is figure out what's that input. What's the input that gave you that output? And for that, you primarily are going to use Google. And if Google doesn't work, you're going to use tools like Hashcat, right? Or maybe you paid for a subscription to a crack site. And how does Hashcat and crack sites work? They work on word lists, right? That's just how hashes get broken. I talked to you about classic crypto attacks. That's mostly about frequency analysis, right? And always remember to try the simple thing first. I wish I could remember that. I always try the very much complicated thing first, and it always wastes a lot of time. But I can tell you to do as I say, not as I do. We talked about stream cipher attacks, and to a large extent, breaking a stream cipher is about assuming someone reused something, XORing things, and then hoping you win, right? And you might. Block cipher, you're not going to break block ciphers unless you're using like a pre-canned attack from a script that's ready to go, or maybe you're super advanced and you've gotten there. That's great. But all I really want you to take away from this talk is what those models are. When you're trying to look in the literature and figure out like what attacks are relevant to me, what tools are relevant to me, you need to look at that slide and go, okay, do I have plain text? Do I have like attacker controlled ciphertext? What do I have? Because it'll help you Google the things. Okay. Yes, go ahead. Yeah, it's file name equals compressed, or file name equals ECB, or file name equals encrypted. And no brute forcing. That's cheese. All right. And of course, exploitation matters, right? These are pieces of software that are doing privileged operations with keys. So even an info leak is a valuable vulnerability. The good news is that even though you're not going to break good crypto is plugged together into bad protocols. And you may very well be able to break bad protocols, which is what we're going to talk about next, protocols and how to break them. Does anyone have any questions of the attacks on building blocks section? Okay, fantastic. Thanks for sticking with me. So a protocol is generally just rules for how two systems communicate. Okay, we've all encountered protocols before. You're looking at a Wireshark capture, you're looking at some protocols. You're looking at, traffic on a UART, you're looking at a protocol. Protocols kind of get exposed to us by the traffic between them, but the protocol is also the rules of operation on both sides. And in particular, a cryptographic protocol is like, how do you handle the keys? What do you do with the ciphertext messages? How do you decide if things are valid? These are all part of cryptographic protocols. When you're looking at protocols on the internet, you will often see this diagram. This is a time sequence diagram. You have actor A and B. Time flows down and the messages go back and forth on this graph of time. You'll find these also in things like UML and stuff like that, but this is like the quintessential diagram for a protocol. And then there'll usually be text that says, when you receive this, do this. When you receive that, do that. You might have names of functions on the side and things like that. And that's how we talk about protocols. So let's make that concrete, right? Sure, that's a protocol. What's an example of a protocol? A great starting point to talk about protocols and cryptographic protocols is the simple authentication protocol. There's a source and a target. The source would like to be authenticated by the target. So the source wants the target to say, yep, I know who you are, or I know you are who you say you are, based on some value, based on some other authority. To do this, the source will send its identifier, given here in this notation by T, and then an encrypted concatenation of T. So I know it was a long time ago. It was like slide number 2, but I showed you curly braces and a subscript K, right? So I hope mouse is working. Yeah. So you can see there is a key. In this case, we're saying the key is KT. No, it's not K times T. It's a key called KT. And it's encrypting a concatenation of T and N. And a concatenation is really just appending, just sticking it together. Has anyone ever run the cat command with 2 files? Right? You did a concatenation. That's all it is. So that's the bar. Again, this is not math. This is notation. Now you know what it means. I hope I haven't violated your expectations too much. So the source is sending this whole thing, T and this blob, this encrypted blob. And the target has to take T, go somewhere and get KT, decrypt the blob, and then verify that the decrypted part of the blob contains the same number, that same identifier T, right? Because when the target gets this information, this thing in between brackets is just a blob. It has to actually decrypt that first and then look at this number inside it. And if this number here matches that number in here, you're good, you're authenticated. If anything else happens, not so good. Now, this simple authentication method is actually designed to include a nonce. I haven't talked about nonces yet. They are a cryptographic term that means a number used only once. And you smoosh that together and we call it a nonce. They're a very important number in cryptographic systems. And it's very important that they're only used once. A nonce that gets reused will often lead to a break in a crypto system. And the reason why the nonce is added here is because otherwise people could just replay this traffic, right? You could just see this authentication go by and I could just send it again. And then of course I would be authenticated because I replayed it. It's the job of the target to actually validate that the nonce was only ever used once. And that's where things kind of get tricky. It's not always trivial to validate that a nonce was used once. There's only really 2 ways to try to do it. And we'll talk about that in a second. So the next protocol to drive home is called a message authentication code, a MAC. Yes, please. The nonce. Yes. In this protocol, the source gets to generate it, which is also bad. Yeah. So the question is, how does the target know the nonce has only ever been used once? There's only a couple design solutions to that problem, and they all have their own weaknesses. And I'll show you some of the ways that those goes wrong. But you're already thinking like a crypto attacker here, which is good. That's a good sign. Very good sign. So message authentication codes are all about validating that a particular message, M, is actually authentic, which means like it came from someone that you trust, right? For some reason. It's kind of simple to put one together, and like this protocol actually looks kind of dumb, right? It's like the message appended with the MAC. Okay, like what are you telling me? Not a whole lot. The MAC can be calculated in a whole bunch of different ways, right? There are things called CBC max and CMAX and HMAX. CMAX is important to remember, use block ciphers, whereas HMAX use hash functions and are frequently also symmetric. So they use a shared key for their HMAX. And of course, there's more complicated formulations of MAX. What the target is supposed to do is repeat that message authentication calculation and then verify that like what it calculated matches the MAC. And if it does, then it says, yeah, that's authentic. We're good to go. And if it doesn't, it's supposed to reject it. Down here at the bottom of the slide is an important note. You will sometimes be given systems that you are told is a crypto system, but it's your job to ask the question, is it actually a crypto system, right? So in this case, an HMAC, a CMAC, these things all need like knowledge of a secret, right? If I gave you a system that had the message and then a digest of the message, like a hash of the message right next to it, would that be a message authentication code? It would not, because hashes and digests are not the same thing as a signature, right? There's no key involved. Because if you use this method where you just stick the hash on the end, the attacker doesn't need to know any secret information. They can do the exact same operation and forge messages. But just like when I mentioned that people will sometimes give you base 64 and tell you it's encrypted, people will sometimes give you digests and tell you that you have a MAC. You do not. You have what is called a message integrity code, MIC, and MICs can be broken. Okay. Next up is digital signatures. This is the asymmetric version of a MAC, right? In this case, there's a public and private key pair. I am holding a private key, and I would like to prove to the world that I made this data. So I use the private key to sign the data. I create a signature, and I attach that signature onto the data. And then anybody that receives the data and the signature can use my public key and confirm that, yeah, I used my private key to sign that data. That's how asymmetric crypto works. And that's how digital signatures work. We have a message. We have a hash of the message that we encrypt with the private key, right? That's what the curly K thing is. And then anyone out there can take this blob and use the public key to verify that, yeah, this thing was actually signed correctly. Now, the trick here with this protocol and what you'll find with a lot of protocols is the question of how does that key get communicated, right? This digital signature protocol is kind of incomplete, right? It doesn't have any information about how the target gets the capital K that matches this little k. In like secure boot solutions, that is often like a hash in a piece of burnt fuses, right? But how does that get into those fuses? And when you're trying to attack these systems, you generally want to ask yourself, okay, how can I control the key? If I had a way to change the public key that so the target is using, then I could use my own private key that matches it, right? Because that's kind of like outside the protocol. So always look for parts of the protocol where it just kind of like there's a gap and ask yourself, well, how can I control that gap, right? Okay, and then another, and probably the most important, because this is what you're going to do to break seed key exchange, is the challenge response protocol. This is an abstract or a general class of protocols. Once again, a source wants to be proven authentic to a target. But instead of like in simple authentication where like the nonce is picked by the source and it just sends this thing over and expects someone to do a decryption, in this case, there's like two matched calculations. The source says to the target, I'm ready, and the target actually sends the nonce. And then the source has the job of like transforming the nonce and sending the transformation back to the target where the target can compare what it saw, right? So the source is doing some crypto, and then the target is doing some crypto, but in orange. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I owe you one. And then it's comparing whether the result of those two crypto operations match. And if they match, you're good to go. You're authentic. That's how challenge response works. It's rooted in like the definition of this function. Sometimes this function is keyed. Like sometimes this function does have a shared secret involved in it. Sometimes it doesn't. And it's really just comes down to the implementation of that function, which anyone who's the CTFs here can think, well, what if I reverse engineer it? Yes, that's exactly what you should do. You should just reverse engineer it if that's the case. Please do that. Okay. And yeah, of course, if you're Googling things, it's important to know that the attacker is actually seeing all the traffic, right? So this is a attacker model of a known plain text attack if you're going to Google stuff, which maybe you should be. Protocols. Remember, I'm going to tell you about things, then we're going to tell you how to break things. So the next one is I'm going to tell you how to break this stuff. In this section, we talked about what protocols are. I gave you examples of simple authentication and challenge response, and how challenge response really extends simple authentication and fixes some problems. Digital signatures are different than message authentication codes, right? Digital signatures are asymmetric. Message authentication codes are symmetric. So if you ever have a Mac, any piece of software that can create a Mac, sorry, this is more important. Any piece of software that can verify a Mac can also create a Mac. There's no privilege separation, right? So compromising software that verifies Macs also gives you the power to forge Macs, which isn't true for digital signatures. In digital signatures, if you compromise a piece of software that can validate a digital signature, it does not have the privilege to create a digital signature, because that's the private public key split. And though you may be given something and you're told it's a Mac, you may actually have been given a MIC, a message integrity code. And if you've been given a message integrity code, there's no secret involved at all. So all you have to do is identify that hash function and then you profit. Okay. A nonce is a really important part of protocols. It means a number used once. If that number is ever reused, bad things happen. So watch out for reused nonces. I think probably most recently and most famously, there was a whole bunch of Bitcoin wallets that were drained due to a reused nonce attack. And by the time that the researchers had found it, criminals had already drained the accounts like years before, right? So like these are known problems and people will profit from them. And then finally, don't forget challenge response. Challenge response is my favorite because it's in automotive, in seed key exchange, and I like hacking trucks. And I hope you do too. Yes, please. As I said, questions of the section summary, do it. Oh, the details, the details. I think it was due to bad random number generation, which is some of the ways that nonces fail. And there was a similar problem with like host keys a long time ago where like, exactly. And a lot of people use random number generators as a way to provide the nonce, and things can happen bad. So that's actually one of the ways that it breaks. So let's talk about how to break protocols. Excellent segue. I now owe you 2 beers. Generally speaking, when you're trying to break a protocol, it's like breaking any specification. You read the spec, which is boring, but you have to do it. And anytime that it says shall or should or must, ask yourself, well, what happens if the implementer just didn't do that? Right? Or read the spec and like identify, well, wait a second, how does the key get there? Why didn't they write how the key moves around? What happens if the key is something I control? What happens if the key is reused? What happens if blah, blah, blah? Ask yourself these questions, make assumptions, and then test things, okay? So with simple authentication, remember the nonce has to have not been seen anymore. And you're right, excellent question. The source chooses the nonce, which is already kind of like, well, how is that good anyways? Let's just gloss over that. The target has to actually say, have I seen this nonce before? And we're talking about maybe like a 16-bit system. So it has to have a table of all the nonces it's seen. Then ask yourself, well, okay, if it has a table of all the nonces it's seen, what happens when it's seen every single nonce? Eventually it has to wrap around, right? Then you get a reuse. And in fact, simple authentication historically happened in garage door openers and key fobs for cars. And a lot of the attacks, even today, revolve around what's called resynchronization, which is a part outside of the protocol, because they used methods where they have to track nonces, which means they have to have a way to reset how they're tracking the nonces. So it's like that, how do I attack it outside the protocol? Go and find a way to initiate resynchronization, and then you can start to predict what the nonces are going to be, right? The other way that you might have a nonce is like what they use in TCP, sequence numbers. So you can have dumb sequence numbers that just go up by 1, or you can have clever TCP sequence numbers that use like pieces of the fields and then smoosh them together and then do modulo arithmetic to get the next one. But the key being that every nonce is predictable from some previous part. The predictable ones, definitely you can try to resynchronize, right? And then simple authentication also failed this one attack, which is how do you look up that KT, right? So that number T comes in that message. what does the target do to actually take the T and go and find the key? And are there ways to do collisions? Because in a lot of these simple authentication methods for like garage door openers, and for example, they had small tables. So it was actually possible to try other values of T that would collide with a key that you knew about. And that was a key. That was an attack. Yeah, and historically, I kind of glossed over this, but they have fun names because they come from key fobs. Like one of them is called the valet attack, because you could actually, the valet could do it by blocking one of the signals and then coming back and then playing the same signal again, right? So it's like something the valet could do to unlock your car. And you'll see some like car related names on the attacks of a simple authentication. So what about message authentication codes? First off, do the dumb thing first. If they actually gave you a MIC and not a MAC, all you have to do is identify what that digest function is, right? And remember, something like hash ID could tell you, right? Well, it's this long, so it's probably this hash function. And then try to do the thing, because if you know what the hash function is, you can write your own data, create your own hash, stick them together and send it, and that'll be a valid MIC. If it's actually an HMAC, right, then Hashcat does know how to crack HMACs. So you can use Hashcat and word lists to attack HMACs. And then don't discount software exploitation, of course, because these crypto systems that can verify HMACs can also create HMACs. So confused deputy or escalation through one of the pieces of software is totally valid. How do we attack digital signatures? I alluded to this before. It's all about the key. Can you control that public key, right? You sent this signature along. How is the target deciding where to grab that public key to do the verification against? In like TLS, this is trust stores, right? And sometimes the TLS system breaks because someone has their certificate compromised and the trust store has the old certificate, right? And this is an example of like, maybe you have a compromised certificate. Maybe if it's like firmware, maybe they put the public key in a place that you can write. That would be dumb too, right? How does that public key get moved around? Because if you can control what the public key is going to be, you can use your own private key that matches it. Okay, so that's how you attack digital signatures. How do you attack challenge response mechanisms? In general, you're going to use like a middle person attack. You have a machine in the middle. And in a lot of cases, this has to actually physically be in between, but there are some network technologies where you don't have to physically be in between. Like if you've ever used BetterCap or EtherCap or other Ethernet-based attacks, you can just be on the same LAN segment and then use like ARP packets to make traffic go through you. So you don't physically have to be in between. On the CAN bus, there are ways to selectively deny messages. So you can also achieve the same logical interposition attacks on protocols. So did that answer your original question? It did, yeah. So it's right there in the attacks, right? This is how things break. If a nonce is reused, things go bad. So how have they possibly implemented tracking nonces? Is it +1? Does it store 8? Does it store all of them? How do you key resynchronization? These are the things you can ask yourself, or how to break these authentication mechanisms. For Mac, is it a digest? If yes, you won. Is it a hash? You can hashcat it. Is it a shared key that you have somehow got control of because it's that piece of software, right? And digital signatures is all about how do you control that public key. And then challenge response, we're going to get into a bunch more of it, but it's all about interposing, seeing the traffic, analyzing it. Questions on protocol attacks? No? No? I know this class is getting long. I am aware, but we're gonna do more Python, so that's something to look forward to. Look forward to more Python. It's coming at you. I only write shitty Python. It's the only kind of Python I write. That's it. All right, so let's talk about a very particular protocol that we all know and love and use every single day, probably every minute of every day, WPA2. This is protected access for Wi-Fi, okay? It superseded WEP, which literally meant for wired equivalent privacy, which is already a bad name. So WPA had to do better. We all typically use WPA2 personal, which is a pre-shared key system. And now when I say pre-shared key to you, you know that that is symmetric crypto, right? It's all synonymous. There is a form of WPA2, which is called Enterprise. Enterprise has authentication of both sides. So you authenticate to the access point as well as the access point authenticating to you, so you don't accidentally connect. Because one of the problems with pre-shared keys is that anybody that knows that key can also pretend to be that access point, which is one of the attacks that pen testers in the room have probably used, right? We're going to talk about WPA2 Personal. It is a protocol that involves a handshake. A nonce gets sent, and I'm super simplifying this. There's actually probably 10 more arrows that have to be added to this. But there's a nonce that's sent, a nonce and a message authentication code comes back, and then a key and a MAC goes back, and then there's an acknowledgement of the installation of that key. So that line in orange is really where the supplicant, which is like the Wi-Fi client, can then join the network. It gets the key that it needs to join the network. The key isn't exactly equal to the pre-shared key that you type in, but it is derived from that. And the AP has to kind of give them a bit of session information on top of that to install it. Okay. So it's a handshake. There's a nonce. And I'm really, really glossing this over, but it's because I want to talk about an attack on WPA2. You can use Hashcat to crack those message authentication codes. They are HMACs. And if anyone's done like AirCrack or AirCrack NG, what you're doing is capturing hashes that are somehow have the pre-shared key as an input to them with a little bit of transformation, but the pre-shared key is an input to that hash. And then you're asking Hashcat to heat up the room in exchange for giving you that pre-shared key, right? That's what Hashcat does for you. And there's other programs that'll do it too. So I'm keep saying Hashcat because that's like my favorite, but Hashcat can crack that. And AeroCrack NG also does both. It does the deauth as well. Because the key is that like you need to actually observe those messages going back. You need to have enough of them to get the information. So AirCrack NG also like deauths clients to make them do the handshakes extra times. Anyhow, that's beside the point. That's not the crypto protocol. There were recently, and I think for the most part, these are patched, but there were interesting vulnerabilities found in the WPA2 setup protocol that we just talked about. And they were called the crack attacks. And it's all about that orange arrow, right? When that key is installed, that's when the client like resets his communication counters. So if you're replaying that message, you can actually reset the counters and reuse session keys. And this has been mostly patched. But there was also issues with installing a null key was allowed. So you could actually send the correct MAC with an all zero key, and then there would be traffic that just wasn't even encrypted, because this is like a stream cipher that uses XOR. And so when you XOR with zeros, what do you get? The original thing, exactly. And the interesting thing about this to me is that WPA2 was actually proven secure. They used a formal logic analysis proof, like I think it was actually COQ, right? And they proved that the specification was complete, consistent, and that there were no protocol vulnerabilities in WPA2. The key being that the specification did not include the statement that you should not install an all zero key, and that the key can be installed once and only once. So there was a specification that the key had to be installed in that orange arrow, but not a specification that it couldn't be installed additionally afterwards. So formal analysis and formal verification of these specifications doesn't always yield an actual secure system, because it's only as secure as the specification is detailed, right? That's the takeaway for me. All right. This is not actually a challenge. Do not attack the Wi-Fi. We're all using it. Don't be a dick. All right. No, don't do it. Okay. So WPA2. I hope you understand now that PSK means it's symmetric crypto. You can crack HMACs with Hashcat, and you can crack the Wi-Fi with Hashcat. Okay. This shouldn't be news to you, but also take away that like specifications aren't always complete. And even something that's proven formally secure might still have holes in it. Another protocol that we all rely on every day is TLS, previously called SSL. You're not supposed to call it SSL anymore. Now you have to call it TLS, but it's the same thing. It actually gives you both confidentiality and integrity, and it authenticates endpoints. And just like how WPA2 has like personal and enterprise, TLS also has TLS and TLS, which is mutual TLS. Mutual TLS, you have to verify yourself to the server as well as the server verifying itself to you. Normal TLS, the green lock in your browser, that's just the server saying that, yeah, I am who I say I am. That's normal unidirectional TLS. And the way it works is with certificates, which are chains of signatures, right? I told you what a digital signature is. A certificate is really a chain of these signatures. There's one at the top, and you see it here called the root certificate. So it's actually it is logically the top. It is the bottom of the diagram. The server leftmost certificate says, here's my cert. And it may also provide these other intermediaries, but this one here in the root, that lives in the trust store of the browser. Your browser is checking that this particular piece of information was signed by a private key that you trust, and that was signed by a key that you trust, and that was signed by a key you trust, all the way up to the root certificate, which is kind of like how things can break, right? So the protocol here isn't just that we have this exchange of information, there's a nonce, we set up the cryptographic protocols, we do this stuff. Part of the protocol is also how is the certificates being validated? Correct validation is like this, right? You should first check that the owner's public key in the cert does actually match the signature in that first level cert, and then you should go to the next one and confirm that, yeah, that one actually matches that signature and it signs the thing below it, and then go up. And you should do that all the way. But historically, not every implementation of TLS has actually done this. Like today, there are a lot of libraries for Android and iOS that will just do this correctly. But, 5 years ago when I wrote this, that was not the norm. And it's important to think about how these things break. In the very end, it actually looks and says, okay, the root certificate, the very last signature, how do I verify that? I have to actually find it in something that's called a trust store. Your browsers are shipped with trust stores. Your operating system has multiple different trust stores that are available to it. And a lot of these trust stores are controlled sometimes by the attacker in certain models, certain attack models. So the server authentication, the normal TLS part, can actually be implemented in a bunch of different ways. These are types that I've made up. I don't have good names for them, so I just call them type 1 through type 6. You could just trust anything. And you definitely have seen this. If anyone's ever run like Zap or Burp and like just started man in the middling HTTPS and it just worked, that's because they just are verifying that there's a cert. There could be one that actually tests for valid certs. You could trust anything where it's in your trust store. And then there's pinning. So pinning is a method where you actually in the software say, I only trust things that are signed by this public key or the hash of this public key, or you control that root, that trust store by yourself. And then on top of that, there's things where you do pinning, but then you also do runtime integrity verification to make sure that people aren't patching out the certificate pinning. So a lot of the attacks on type 1 and type 2, they work like Burp and Zap do. They sit in the middle, they receive connections on one side from the client, and they just lie about the TLS connection. Everything being sent back to the client is its own certificate chain, and then they do their own TLS up to the server. That's how the Burp and the Zap work. And if you actually have software that like is validating that everything's in the trust store, then it's not going to work, right? If you go back to this, that last trust store check, if the software is correctly doing that, then Burp and Zap aren't going to succeed. But what happens is, like, if I'm an attacker in the sense that I want to cheat at a video game, I actually run the software on my controlled environment and I can install certificates into the trust store, right? So that's one way that you can bypass that mitigation, which brings you like this type 3. How do you control the trust store? Okay. So then what do you do if like someone says no certificate pin? So in the software, I've said, I only trust this public key. Well, there's actually like runtime hooking mechanisms. Afrida is probably one of the newest ones, but the exposed framework was around well before that. And they're just ways to like hook into the software, grab execution as it goes by, and either like jam the test of the certificate or change the pub key and off you go, which then leads to type 6, where they have runtime integrity, and anti-debug and all the kinds of stuff that we now find in our video games, so we can't cheat at our video games. What I think is kind of interesting is, did I put the tool down here? Yeah, this one. So cert minim. This was a talk at DEF CON 31, And what the developer did that's really, really clever, this spooksman person, is they realized that a lot of software is put together not by like one developer. It's actually a conglomeration of a bunch of libraries, right? And they noted that where burp and zap fall short is everything falls apart on the first failed TLS connection with burp and zap. You just don't get anywhere after that. Cert Midim has this like adaptive way of saying, okay, that one failed. I'm just going to actually allow that one to go. I'm not going to man in the middle it, and then I'm going to try to intercept the next one. And it like adaptively tries to figure out which ones it can intercept, so it can find MITM vulnerabilities deeper in the execution of the software, like later in the software startup, which was really fruitful for the research. They found tons and tons and tons of software that was vulnerable to late stage interception. So this tool is very useful, very powerful. So yeah, we talked about TLS. This is a very high level thing. You all probably use it every day and understand roughly how it works. It is an asymmetric system. It is going to give you authenticity. It's going to give you integrity and confidentiality, all the things you need. But how that certificate chain gets validated is the key part of the protocol. And that's where it can break. Questions on TLS? No. I feel like TLS is bread and butter. We all know TLS, right? But don't say SSL. They get so angry when you say SSL. Okay. We have made it to the fun stuff. I mean, this is the stuff I love. Hacking trucks. I hope you love it too. We're going to be done in roughly half an hour. I hope we can survive for another half an hour. Right. Who knows what a CAN bus is? Anybody here done CAN bus stuff? Dope. Love that. Very cool. Thank you. Cred. The CAN bus is a controller area network found in planes, trains, automobiles, trucks. It's a serial bus. It has various bit rates. The most common bit rate is really 500 kilobaud, sometimes 250. It is like framing and signaling. You can see here like a logic analysis capture that I've done. It's showing you things like the bit stuffing. The identifiers are there. This is an extended identifier frame, so it is 29 bits for the identifier. This is what you find in trucks, also on J1939. If you really want the gory details of how CAN works and how to break it, Dr. Ken Tyndall's videos and Grimm's videos are excellent, so refer back to that slide. The key thing with CAN, it was introduced to replace multiple pairs of wires that used to string through vehicles. So vehicles were becoming really, really heavy because as they added features, they had to add wire pairs, like either like a differential pair or a ground and a signal, and they would have to run it everywhere. So from the body controller out to this door, to that door, to this window, to that window, and the wires were adding up and getting heavier and heavier and heavier. So the engineers introduced CAN so that instead of having a pair of wires per signal, they could multiplex all those signals onto just 2 wires and do it in the time domain. So send packets, and the packets would contain the signal values, which is kind of what I'm trying to show you in this graph. There's like a time series information of packets, and the blue numbers are changing over time, and the changing of those blue numbers gives you this graph. That's what CAN was made to do. And the reason it's called a controller area network is it's made for control loops. It's made to have multiple microcontrollers talking together on the network, doing like a real-time control actuation system. So real-time is very important. Reliability is very important. And in 1939, the same thing is true, right? This is diesel engines we're talking about in J1939. In fact, J1939 is found everywhere a diesel engine is found. It's not just heavy trucks. It's trains and ships and generator sets. You will also find 1939 there. On heavy trucks, we have access to this 9-pin port called the Deutsch 9. And on it, you will find 2 or more J1939 ports, which is 2 or more CAN networks. But the trucks are made up of even more CAN segments than that. So this is a network architecture diagram that I found from free material in a textbook. So it's free use. Normally, the manufacturers do not share these wiring diagrams. Normally, they make you sign NDAs to see these things. This one you can see has more than 6 CAN segments, even though only 3 of them are available here on the diagnostic connector, which they note also carries UDS. See, the diagnostic connector has J1939 and UDS. we're going to talk about UDS and how to break it. The way 1939 puts together CAN, it has this idea of what a unicast traffic is and what broadcast traffic. So unicast is point to point, one person talking to another person. Broadcast is one person talking to everybody, and it has a way to package the information depending on those two things. So it has both. And when you're talking about unicast information, there is a source address as well. And I think you see a similar one to this for normal CAN earlier. So in passenger cars and in trucks, how CAN in 1939 differ is kind of like the opposite. In passenger cars, all that time series information and how it's encoded in the runtime for the signals is all proprietary. Every car is its own rules for how it's encoded. They're all information that is tightly guarded when they build a vehicle. And even vehicles in different model years can have completely different protocols for how the time varying information is put together. But the diagnostics are standard, and that's because of the California Air Resources Board. So I don't know if anyone, you're probably old enough to remember Drive Clean. You had to do the Drive Clean thing for your car. Yeah, we don't really do that anymore, but that's literally because of California. And that diagnostic port that you have on your car, the OBD2 port, is also because of California. So in passenger cars, you have completely proprietary time series information, but a standardized diagnostic. Okay. In trucks, it's the opposite. In trucks, the fleets wanted to be able to buy a brake controller from here and an engine from there and a transmission from here and have them all work together. So they standardized the time series encoding in J1939, but the diagnostics are all proprietary. The good news is that the diagnostics today almost entirely runs on UDS. Even though what comes after the UDS layer is proprietary, it still uses that first layer of UDS. And the diagnostics in 1939 is used for all the fun stuff. Firmware reading, reconfiguration, cycling, air supply valves, all the cool things, okay? So, which brings us to UDS. UDS is protected, it has an authentication protection given by service 27 hex, which is called seed key exchange. This authentication mechanism also implicitly authorizes the source to do functions. And it kind of depends on what's implemented. This is the proprietary part. Some ECUs have 7 different levels that you have to authenticate to. Some of them have just one, and then you have access to everything, right? But when you get access to the right level, you can read memory, you can write memory, reflash the code. There's also routines you can do like cycling, air control valves, and things like that. And we are going to play with UDS today. If you haven't already installed this repo, I recommend you do. We're going to actually do a seed key PCAP analysis. So get this repo installed, do the pip install requirements thing. In my Discord post this morning on the workshops channel, it gives you the 2 commands you need to run to install it. I think you're not going to be disappointed. It'll be worth it. I know it's more shitty Python, but that is the only kind of Python. So, all right. So the cool thing about UDS is that it's very verbose. So it tells us a lot about errors. There's a lot of different error codes defined in UDS. And oftentimes when you're poking around on different services, and a service in UDS is a lot like a port on a server. So you're poking at this service, hey, would you give me something? It won't just reply back to you like, no, connection closed. It'll literally say to you, no, security access denied, which is giving you as an attacker the information that not only does that service exist and it does something important, and I have to authenticate to get access to it, right? And the way you actually gain that access is to do this seed key exchange. So the server, the thing that hosts the service, which is called a session holder in the spec, it'll emit a seed, and the client needs to return a key. The service in question for security access is 27. With UDS, it does this weird thing for positive responses. It, instead of just giving you a reply back, if you did something right, it will send its own kind of message to the service plus 40. So when you see 67, that's a positive response to 27. If something went wrong, there's a special error service for that. So 7F is always the error, but plus 40 hex is always the success. And then inside hex 27, inside service 27, anytime you ask for an odd sub function, which is the next number after the service, I'm going to show you a plot of this too. Any odd one is give me a seed, and any even one is here's a key. So let's try to drive that home. So this is a sequence diagram because we're talking about protocols. And now when we see it depicted this way, we know that it's a challenge response protocol, right? This falls within the general form of challenge response protocols. And the only difference is you don't see crypto in orange here, right? It's just normal crypto in purple. But the diagnostic software in this case is the source. And the diagnostic software wants to make the ECU believe that it's authentic so that it can perform its diagnostic functions. So it says, hey, give me a challenge. So 2705. And with UDS, the first layer is always ISO-TP. I know it's a lot of words. With UDS, the very first byte is always the length of the message. Okay. So this is a 2-byte message right here. There's a 4-byte message here. 7-byte message down here. I don't know why that doesn't add up. That's a typo. Forget about the last one. So this purple one here, that's the sub function I mentioned, right? We're saying service 27, give me a seed, and it knows it wants a seed because it's an odd sub function. I could have asked for 7, 9, 11, all of those. And each one of those actually corresponds to a different security level. So if you're like scanning one of these things, you actually want to ask for every odd sub function and see what return codes you get back, because you'll learn something. Sometimes there's actually a UDS code that says conditions not correct. So you know, like, oh, I didn't like first authenticate to this other level. Some of them say like parameter out of range. You're like, oh, it's too high. So the error messages are very verbose. Anyhow, the next thing that comes back to you is plus hex 40, see 27 to 67. So this is a positive confirmation. It keeps the odd sub function. So we know this is a response to seed. So we know that the next thing that comes at us is the seed. And this isn't a typo. The seeds in J1939 are 16 bits. That's how long or how wide the seed key exchange is there. So that's the seed, right? And then we say, okay, great, thank you. I would like to now give you a key. Here's an even number, and it's always +1 of the thing you requested for this to get even, and then we give it the key. And then it might say back to us, yep, you're good, rock on. Okay, so here's an actual traffic capture, because things get a little, we're only looking at certain layers, right? And down here is the actual traffic capture. So on J1939, those arbitration IDs that we talked about are 29 bits, which means like they fit into 4 bytes, but you never really have high stuff. And 18 is like the most common thing you'll see in the first byte of J1939, very common. And then there's an addressing scheme. DA actually means direct address. So there's some jokes in the 1939 spec. And then you have source 0, target F1. And then it says, okay, direct address from F1 to 0. So you can see this is back and forth, back and forth. And down here, I've tried to color code some things for you. So here's the seed request. Here's the seed response. Here's the key request and the key response. And this is an actual example from, I don't remember what ECU, probably a Cummins engine controller, because it comes from Dr. Daly's research. And that's the difference. That's like, this is what you would see in a traffic capture down here, and this is what it means in the protocol sense. Seeing some nodding heads. I don't see anybody going, no. So I think we're mostly okay. That's how trucks work. All right, so now you know enough to actually break these things. I'm not, like, no joke, you're ready. You installed this automotive playground, okay? There is a Jupyter notebook in there called Harder Seed Key Analysis. Like that automotive Scapy playground is made for students to like just go step by step into this thing, interacting with the bus. I'm not going to make you interact with the bus. I don't have a truck up here. But what I do have is a bunch of PCAPs that I made that correspond to 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if you want to guess these seed key routines by just looking at the hex, you can actually do that. You 100% could just look at this hex and guess 3 out of the 4. The FlagBot format is like this. You have to actually give FlagBot the formula. So I know I said no math. I lied. This is math. You have to actually give FlagBot math. Okay. But you can guess this by looking at the hex, or you can open up the Jupyter notebook and use the harder seed key analysis to run some automated analysis on the PCAP files. And I'll show you like really just how simple it is to break some seed key exchange.
Yeah, good, I think we're gonna be done in, like half an hour. Yeah, don't worry about that. Thank you. Yeah, good, good. Hope you enjoy it. Yes, I love the party, tonight. Probably, I got a sore throat. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to party too much. Just the right. Yeah, same for me. Thanks, you guys. Has anyone guessed one by just looking? You installed the playground. Like, I love that. I love it. I made it for students. I think it's really useful to learn about automotive stuff. So like Jupyter Notebook is worth running, but you could actually guess one from looking. Like, remember, this is odd. So this is the seed. And I'm only showing you like the seed key. I stripped out the other stuff. So it's like, the first row is seed, the second row is key, seed, key, seed, key. I took out all the others. So you really just have to look at like the odd rows and the even rows. Odd rows and the even rows. Anyways. So it's going to be easier, right? So if you have Python, why don't you have Python? So I have Python 3.11. So I'm looking at the most recent Python. We can clone it. I know I tested this morning after I fixed it. Yeah, so here you go. This is the URL, so we can clone it. Use up the Wi-Fi resources. And then we CD into it, and we're going to install all the dependencies. So you do that with pip install r requirements.txt. That's all good. Now, if you were already running a Jupyter Notebook, you can just go to it. Otherwise, at this point, you would run Jupyter Notebooks, Python M, Jupyter Notebook. I'm not going to hit enter here because I'm already running one. I'm just going to open a tab. So in these Jupyter Notebooks that have set up the Automotive Scrappy Playground, they're made for kind of students to come in and just rock with them. It says like you're supposed to go through easy. You should. The shortcut here, the TLDR, is just hit this button here. We're going to restart and run all the cells. That was this button up here, this fast forward button. And you might get like warnings about like Wireshark not being installed or whatever. Deprecation warnings, don't care. We're hackers, we don't care about warnings. And then after you run it, you should see like this. There should be a button that says run interact and a box where you can put in the file name. And I think the very first column is sk example1.pcapng. So when I hit that button, this Python code that I wrote goes through and extracts the seed and the key, the seed and the key, the seed and the key. Now, this isn't exactly what you see in the table, but it's the same code. It's the same relationship between these two. So here, in this format, does anyone see what the function is now? Seed key, seed key, seed key. You're looking for like, what's the F? Add one. Bingo. Now you might be saying to yourself, but Ben, that's stupid. And you would be right. You'd be 100% right. That is stupid. But I don't feel bad about it because this is an example of a kind of a seed key routine that you might find in ECUs. A lot of ECUs actually do this dumb thing where they do a transformation that's linear, and then they use modulo arithmetic on it. So +1 is literally not one you would find, but you will find linear routines. So let's look through the rest of this notebook. I also included a way to plot the pairs, right? So in this case, you can plot them, and you can see they're clearly linear. It's +1. That shouldn't surprise us. I also included a way to use Z3 to solve for linear coefficients in m times x plus b. And now I'm really breaking my promise of math, but I did it anyways. And you can see that Z3 says, yeah, I mean, it's just 1. We know that, right?
What's the formula for pipeline?
Yeah, yeah, so the formula for the first one, should be P equals seed plus 1. That should be the flow.
Yeah. But
Did that not work?
the first one, not linear.
You're gonna make me test flag one.
Work for me.
Worked for you.
Yeah, but
Yep, it is. It's P equals seed plus 1. That's the first one. Okay, so then let's look at the second one. Why not? We're already here, right?
but so +1 doesn't match the pcap. Doesn't match what's in the PDF, but what's in the pcap, right?
I
Yeah,
understood
so
correctly,
it
it's
does
separate.
match because these are little endian. See,
Oh,
5B to
okay.
5C, 3.6 to 3.7.
Okay.
Okay, so we do have, example number 2. Let's look at example number 2. So seed is 4F25, and then we get 3534. And then it's 63ED, and they get 3534. 7A25, 3534. Maybe we should plot it. Maybe that'll help us understand it. Does anyone know what the formula is? What's the formula? No? I mean, I'll give you a hint. It's dumb.
Static, yeah.
Yeah, it's a static key. A static key. And you might also now be saying, but Ben, that's still dumb. Why are you doing dumb things to us? I still have no apologies because because the Tesla CP exchange actually had a static key for years. And it was 35, 34, 37, 36, 31, 30, 33, 32, 3D. So at least Tesla had like a 64-bit key, but it was static. So yeah, this is dumb, but that is also something you might find. And you see that like using the diagnostic tool and capturing traffic can be a really powerful way to analyze these things. So we'll look at number 3. So this is example number 3. Key equals static, and I think no, like key equals value, and I think you have to give the value as a hexadecimal value. Yeah, it's key equals 0x3435. So this is our next routine right here. There's really no clear relationship. I'm not gonna make you stare at it. We can plot it. We can plot the relationship. You can see it's kind of all over the place. It's definitely sublinear. Like there's nothing that has the same plot. And if I made a larger PCAP, it probably would be very noisy. We can ask Z3 to solve for the values, but it'll say, nope, there's nothing to solve for, it's invalid. Now I also included another thing that's a hint here. A reasonable next test is to see if your CP routine is using XOR. And what this column is key XORed with the seed. And what we see is the exact same value coming out again and again and again, which tells us that the routine is seed XORed with this value. Right, so it's key equals seed XOR OX342C. So does anybody have this notebook installed themselves? You do? Okay. So try example 4. Anybody else installed it? I'll give you some time to install it. It will also solve example 4 for you, and I'll walk through it in like 2 or 3 minutes. Solve number 4. Notebook makes short work of that one, right? And it, just that function works on lots of ECUs. Yeah, Z3 and a few pairs gives you the answer. Yeah, you should always try static XOR because that's a thing. The only ones that aren't in here is it's very common to do like combinations of cyclic shift, where they take the seed, they shift it by some number, they shift it by a different number over here, and then they XOR it together. That's a common one too. I could write a Z3 format for that too. Yeah. Anybody still working on it?
Number 4.
Yeah, number 4. See some consternation. Let you go. Let you go at it a bit more.
Slightly linear. Basically, for the channel, the formula is the winning routine.
Yeah, that's right. Because when you're dealing with seed key exchange, right? Let's go back to a slide. Seed key exchange is like this, right? You win if you know what the function is, the closed form of the function. Sometimes that's a key, like the XOR one, we knew what the function was when we knew what the XOR key was. But in general, it's like, yeah, closed form for the function, and that's how you win.
So for that, from challenge number 4, how would I write that for the challenge one?
You'll see a little bit of text above that says y equals m times x plus b.
That's what okay.
So stick in m and stick in b. Okay. You want a little bit more time, or do you want to see this solved? Over here on the, over here, do you want more time? You're okay? Okay. So we load up the key pairs, right? And you can see there's no clear relationship one-to-one. I mean, there's nothing obvious when you look at the hex, that's fine. If we look at the plot, it's also nothing obvious. But it's important to remember that like linear congruential stuff, like when you do modulo arithmetic, it could be that this is actually wrapping around so fast. It could be a really high rate line that actually wraps around the plot. So that's what happens in like ECUs with 16-bit math. The 16-bit math just wraps around. So this linear routine here that we did with the Z3 solving, it actually does that math. And tries to see, like, does it fit? See the modulo right here? So we're doing modulo 16-bit math. And we're just asking Z3, which is like this equation solver, can you find a value that just satisfies this 16-bit math? And if yes, then we win. So where's the button? This is the button right here. Just like that. Routine is potentially valid. B and M are the following. Right? And all we did was just ask Z3 to look at C key pairs. I think if I remember correctly, it only needed 3 to actually get those values. So it doesn't even need that many diagnostic captors to get the number. So, yeah, in this case, the answer is P equals seed plus, this number.
Oh, now it's not hex. Okay,
I think it accepts both. In fact, actually, the hex version is an Easter egg. You should convert those numbers to hex, because the hex version of that is an Easter egg.
I guess do the formula.
I'm gonna stick around and I'll give you all of the Easter eggs and all of the flags for my CTFing peers, so you can get full completion. But yeah, that's the answer. That's a closed form for the CT routine. And if you know that, then that means as an attacker, if I want to go use a UDS service that requires authentication, it'll give me a seed. I can transform the seed and I'm authenticated. That's all I needed to know. Now, a lot of ECUs have multiple levels of authentication, and many of them will have what's called, that's a different routine. So I hear this from ECU engineers a lot. We'll say, well, there's a problem with your CQ routine, and they say, yeah, but memory write is a different routine. And what they mean is it's one that the diagnostic software doesn't interface with. So you can't necessarily use traffic capture to figure out what the different routine is, because you never see the pairs, right? If I get to an ECU and it says I have to go to level 7, but the diagnostic tool uses level 5, I never see the pairs for level 7, so I can't use this method. But let's talk about the other methods that we can use to break CP routines, because you might not always have the traffic capture.
So a lot of times I like to bore students with attack trees. Because I like you, I'm not going to bore you with attack trees. We're going to skip it. So if we are attacking C key exchange, ultimately we want to do is like what's called pirating a session. We want to be able to lie to the ECU that we are in fact an authentic piece of software. In some cases, we want to lie and pretend that we're an engineering tool. This is like software that the manufacturers never ship out into the field. It only exists within their walls and only they use it for production and engineering facility functions. Sometimes we want to be a diagnostic tool that has features. We want to lie about it, right? So if over here in the top, what we have is diagnostic software, what we can do is identify the parameters by reversing the diagnostic software, or we can like identify the routine from like the pairs. That's what we just did, this red box, okay? Maybe we don't have the diagnostic software. Maybe what we have is the ECU firmware. Okay, well, if we have the ECU firmware, we know that this routine here is the same as this routine here. So if we reverse engineer the code in the ECU, we also can get the C key firmware, right? So what if what we have is the captures? If we have the captures, we can solve for unknowns like we just did, or this attack can be really fruitful. This is a 16-bit space. And every time you ask for a seed, it gives you just a 16-bit number. It's not very long before you actually see the same number again. So like one of the ways you could have broken this is just taken that table from the PCAP, just kept asking until you saw the number that you knew the answer for and sent the answer, right? Because in this case, that target is sending you a nonce and the nonce was reused. Game over, right? That's the challenge response protocol attack, right? If a nonce gets reused, bad things happen. Some ECUs are incorrectly implemented, then they let you actually try keys again and again and again. They don't have a limit to how many times you can try keys. Some ECUs have like a bug in them where you can request a particular diagnostic session, try the key, and then request the diagnostic session again, and then try the key again. So you can actually bypass some of the limits by resetting counters. And so brute force is something you can try to do in a 16-bit space, as long as there's no counters or mitigations against that attempt, okay? And then there's really cool stuff that people have done in the past where they said, I can't dump the firmware, I can't figure this out from diagnostics, but I'm guessing that the check of the key happens at this point in time, and so I'm just going to do a glitch campaign. So they just keep like trying to authenticate, and a glitch campaign is where you kind of move this little window of doing a voltage glitch on the ECU. and they just wait until they're lucky. And all of those things exist. You can see examples here in the slide deck if you want to refer to it later about how you can do extraction, reversing, the brute force method. But generally speaking, the takeaway here is that like crypto isn't always crypto, right? People will tell you, oh, don't worry, it's encrypted. Or people will tell you, like, don't worry, we're using a message authentication code. Don't worry, we use cryptography. It's fine. But it's not always fine because people's definition of crypto isn't always cryptographically secure, right? That's your key takeaway. So smarter people than me did this Z3 formula extraction thing. You can see a link to their paper down here on Enigmatos. I just kind of copied it. This is an example of that shift, like the way sometimes they do cyclic shifts for ECU routines. And they were able to solve for that there. The glitching pass thing was done by Riskier, super smart people. And yeah, we are there. So if you're trying to attack seed key exchange, it depends on what you have. And depending on what you have, you can win. But if you have those exchanges, the traffic capture of the seed and the key back and forth, now you have a tool in your toolbox, and you would probably get lucky with XOR and linear. You have a good chance of unlocking something now. So, I mean, go and do that. And if you do unlock an ECU with that, you let me know. I think that would be super rad. And I can always help you if you're trying to hack a car. Message me anytime. That's my jam. So we made it to closing. But wait. Does anyone have any questions about seed key exchange attacks? Feel like you're all car hackers now, so you're probably fine. But was there something I glossed over? Yeah. And I mean, like, today's ECUs are different. Like, an ECU that was made today is not going to fall victim to this. But there's a lot of stuff out there that wasn't made today. And even a car made today doesn't include only ECUs that were made today. So your mileage may vary, but you'll probably win. So we made it. I hope you've learned some stuff. I'm going to just do that thing I do where I say the things I said, and feel free to stop me and ask questions at this point. This is a great time to ask questions as well. Remember that modern crypto is about numbers and classic crypto is about letters. And there is something that exists in between. There are the hybrid systems that do classic crypto on numbers, and you might run into those in reversing challenges and things where code is executing, right? But generally, modern crypto isn't taking letters as input. It's taking UTF-8 or ASCII encoded data as its input, and it works on the numbers. You will hear people say that crypto is hard, right? Meaning, like, in an attacker perspective, crypto is hard. What they mean is that, like, correct crypto is hard to break. And when you get to, like, block ciphers, yeah, you're probably not going to attack and break a block cipher unless you're, like, pulling a tool and you're like, oh, I know this server is vulnerable to Poodle, and I'm going to run the Poodle attack on it. I know it's vulnerable to logjam, push a button, do logjam. That's fine. That'll work. But you're not going to cook up your own block cipher attack, and that's okay. Because even systems that are put together with correct crypto blocks aren't always put together correctly at the protocol level, and so you might be able to break the protocols. When you're breaking a protocol, read the spec. Wherever it says shall, must, should, think about what happens when it don't, and think about the things that aren't written in the spec, right? Like the crack attack was all about, they didn't say the key could only be installed once. Maybe I should test that. That's a great example of testing a spec. What didn't they say in the specification? And that's how you break protocols. Don't discount execution environment compromises, right? Cryptographic systems are dealing with highly sensitive pieces of information, both the plain text and the key. So an information leak in a crypto software is a valuable bug. Okay. We talked about TLS. Don't forget that cert minim tool. That cert minim tool is way better than anything that's come before it, at least for today's software. Today's software has been tested with burp and zap, and so that first connection is going to fail. But those later connections don't always fail, and you won't get to them without using that tool. So take that away and try that tool. It's pretty amazing. And then for seed key exchange, you've now got something in your belt where you can go and pwn some UDS and get some diagnostic functions. I hope you do. Honestly, that would be pretty rad. Here's some other stuff you could do. As you've identified, CryptoPals doesn't exist anymore at this website, but you should be able to Google it, right? Oh, okay, so it's at cryptopals.net or cryptopals.com instead. But CryptoPals, if you've enjoyed this workshop, these hands-ons, the ramp up that CryptoPals gives you into all things cryptography is really fantastic. And it's worthwhile like starting some Jupyter notebooks or starting some Python code and just going through them one by one. When you're done, you're going to have your own crypto attacking toolkit, and you'll just feel very accomplished. It's a great series. The other thing that I highly, highly recommend is this textbook. Both makers and breakers really should read Security Engineering by the late and great Ross Anderson. We lost him this year, but this book is phenomenal. And I have lifted a whole bunch of this presentation, including like the structure of it, from his textbooks. So, you know, he'll be missed. Amazing work. Buy that book. Actually, better than buying it, the second edition is free as PDFs, and it's only missing like one chapter.